Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of It Is Written. These videos are to equip and encourage the believer to continue to do what God has called you to do. So in our world today, we're living in some very divisive times with the new developments in social media where everyone has a say, everyone has a word, everyone is able in an instant to put out what they believe and think. It has really created a lot of divisiveness in our country. And furthermore, I believe these developments have actually allowed us to trade intimacy for convenience, especially when we try to converse and talk about our differences. Timeout, real quick. Let me go into a little soapbox. I'm a millennial myself. In no way, shape, or form am I trying to condemn social media and all the positive things that it can bring about. But as believers, we have a responsibility to our Facebook comments and our Twitter fingers. And when we come across things that are just totally different to what we believe, it is our duty to respect that person, realize they're made in the image of God, and keep it moving about our business. All right, I'm ready. Let's get back to it. So in this episode of It Is Written, we're going to talk about our differences through the story of Joseph. Before we get to that story of Joseph, let me explain a couple things. We all have two things in common. First, we're all made in the image of God. So consequently, we have free will, we can be creative. Within ourselves, we have intrinsic worth and value. Second, we are all sinful. We all have been affected and marred by sin, physically, mentally, emotionally. Also, we all have this inclination to sin. Now, these two commonalities are very fundamental, for they affect everything about us as humans. Now, although these two things are very fundamental, we have a lot more differences in our lives than we do commonality. For instance, we have different experiences, different ways of thinking, different intricate personalities that make up who we are. Now, although we are very complex and different beings, God infinitely loves us all. I would argue that because we are so complex and different beings, that God's love for us isn't a passive love, but it's an active love. Let me explain. Most of you all know I have a daughter. Her name is Summer. Now, my love for her is very active. I have to consciously make an effort to love her in a way in which she can receive my love. Baby girl likes to be read to. She likes to be sung to. She likes to be held. She likes to be fed and played with. So I show her love in the way she receives love because I know my daughter. On the other hand, I have a nephew. His name is Reese. And because he is very different than my daughter, I have to love him differently in a way in which he can receive my love. Now, I like to imagine that God, being perfect and infinite in his love, has done this, is doing this, and will do this to each person who has lived, is living, and will live. God's love is active because we are so different. Like, just think about this. It would be very boring if everybody was the same. God's love would just be, on autopilot. He wouldn't have to actively engage with his creation. Like, praise God that he loves us because we're different. Although he loves us because we're different, we as fallen beings oftentimes misconstrue our differences to threats to our own uniqueness. And therefore what we do is we treat each other sinfully and not like we're made in the image of God. So this brings us to the story of Joseph in Genesis chapter 37, starting in verse 18 through 20. And what that verse basically says is that the brothers of Joseph saw him from afar, and as he was coming near, they conspired to kill him. They looked around and said to one another, "Hey, here comes this dreamer. Let's kill him and throw him into the pits." Now I'm going to try to give you some context and make it real quick. Joseph was loved by his father more than his brothers. Therefore, Joseph's brothers were really jealous of him, so they sold Joseph into slavery to the Ishmaelites. Now the Ishmaelites, one way or another, end up selling him to be a servant in Egypt. So Joseph is being a servant in Egypt. He gets lied on by Potiphar, who is Pharaoh's wife, and Pharaoh ended up throwing him into a prison. Now, while he was in this prison, Joseph began interpreting the dreams of the prisoners and the guards with an extreme amount of accuracy. So much accuracy that the prison guard ended up telling Pharaoh that, hey, Joseph can interpret your dreams that you're having. So Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream. Long story short, he ended up becoming the second most powerful man in Egypt. A famine arose, and Joseph's brothers and father had to come to Egypt for help. And it was actually Joseph who was able to deliver his brothers and his fathers from this famine. But let's go back to the beginning of the story. Joseph had one thing that was similar to the rest of his family. They could interpret dreams. So one time Joseph had a dream and he told it to his family, and his family interpreted that dream with a lot of ease. I think interpretations and being able to interpret dreams ran inside the family. But the brothers didn't focus on that similarity that Joseph had. Instead, when they plotted against him to kill him, they said, hey, look at this dreamer. They called out the difference that he had. He was a dreamer. And again, because he was different, the brothers sold him into slavery. Check this out. It wasn't Joseph's difference that saved him. It was actually a similarity that they all had. He interpreted the dream of Pharaoh, something that his family had as well. Unfortunately, as humans, we act like Joseph's brothers. Instead of celebrating the differences that we have, like God does, we condemn it and we think less of a person. And with that, it's now time for some A&T. A&T number 1, celebrate our differences. You see, we need to be like the Lord. He loves us and is active in his love when we are different. Therefore, when we see different lifestyles on Instagram, different political views on Facebook and Twitter, let's love and celebrate those differences. A&T number 2, being different comes at a price. Being a believer, people are going to either love us or hate us because of the message that we bring. We need to be like Joseph in the story and be faithful and true to whatever God has called us to. And finally, A&T number 3, recognize our commonality. When we are able to recognize that we are sinful and we are made in the image of God, we have a foundation to be empathetic to other people. This is crucial for us as believers. The Bible talks about, hey, they're going to know that you are mine in the way that you love one another. So when you're online and you're confronted with all these different types of worldviews, lifestyle, and images, be sure to recognize that we are sinful and that we are all made in the image of God. That's all I have for today. Hopefully this video was encouraging to you. I look forward to seeing you all same time next week on It Is Written.